Well, Jaima, I'm glad to be here this morning. I guess it's almost old hat that I start off the same every time. How odd I feel to be in the situations that I find myself in. Ever since I started as a Vedantan, it's been quite a trip, quite a journey along some very odd places. I'm often kind of stepping outside of myself and catching myself. I'm like, this is not anything that ever occurred to me as a possibility for this life. It's not to see myself dressed in orange robes and sitting on a Hindu stage at a Hindu temple and teaching people from India about their own tradition and having that conversation, is incredibly odd. And I've learned to laugh a lot about it with Mother and just have a good time with it and enjoy the play as it goes along, and to just try and make myself available to her to do these things. I think the toughest one for me was in India itself, in Kolkata itself, on Swamiji's 150th birth anniversary, that I was invited to speak at a local, something similar to a Lions Club or something, about Swami Vivekananda in his hometown. And I stood up in front of this group and I thought, wow, probably anyone here who knows more about Swamiji could tell more intimate details about his life than I could, and how odd that is. So Mother and I have this agreement that I'm not a guru. I don't see myself as a teacher in that respect. I'm a cheerleader. So my goal always is, first of all, to vacate so that Mother can have her time with you. But secondly, just to run along beside you in your spiritual life with my pom-poms raised up and just cheering you on to go higher, go faster, do better, take it where you want to go, as a reminder always. And I gave up kind of following traditions because I'm never going to get them right. I just don't have the mind or the disposition for it. And so I may bumble through some things. Today I may say some things improperly, pronounce things improperly or whatnot. I don't start with a chant. I have them memorized, but I always figure I just don't feel honest in that regard. So I'm just coming at you as a nice suburban boy that has found a very odd path of life and has found a great deal of joy and a great deal of freedom and a great deal of wonder in it. And I'm happy to share that perspective and that ideal with you. And I hope that you walk out more excited and more hopeful and more invigorated about the potentials of what it is to be here. So to start, I always start with a Hafiz poem, and there's a reason for that. Back in the days before I really cared anything about God or spiritual life, I was in the Aardvark bookstore, secondhand bookstore in San Francisco, and I picked up a book of poetry because I liked the cover. Back then this was all gilt gold, and it was very shiny and very attractive. And so I picked it up and read a poem, and for the first time in my life, I read something that made sense to me, that seemed to come into my world. Because Hafiz will take very worldly settings, like a bar or some, street with street workers on it or something, and he'll use that to make a spiritual point. That the tavern keeper is serving up drafts of spiritual bliss to all of his seekers at the counter. And it just changed the way I saw the world. And a lot of what I read in Ramakrishna was very similar to that. This is probably a collection of some of my favorite books right here, actually, oddly enough. Ramakrishna was that way also when he was in a carriage and he passed by a tavern and he saw these drunkards reeling out front of the temple, out front of the tavern. He went into a state of spiritual bliss and hung out the window of his cab and said, yes, yes, enjoy the bliss of God. because for him all bliss came from God alone. He knew God as the ultimate source of that. And he knew that everything those men were looking for in drink, that ultimately they were going to find it in God. And so that love could just flow from him without any judgment, without any requirement, but only inspiration to keep going and to look higher in that regard. This poem that I open to here, really, The Wonderful Lawlessness.
Thank you, buddy.
Late in winter, my heart is still a rose in bloom. Late in summer, I still have snow-covered peaks upon my back where we can all play and slide. At night, I need no candle or lamp, for my soul has forever awakened to there being just the reality of light and the wonderful lawlessness of God. Late in winter, I need no heat, for I have entered that infinite fire. Come, build a sled. Find a grand hill within my verse, you and I and God. We should play here more often, upon a peak such as Hafiz, that the beloved has carved so well. So with that, we're going to jump into the room with Ramakrishna, some almost 200 years ago now. And we're going to listen to a story that he tells. It's a very simple story, but a very profound one. And I've been reading it for almost 20 years now and still not sure that I understand it. In this story, he says, there was a man who kept a solution of dye in a tub. Many people came to him to have their clothes dyed. He would ask a customer, what color would you like to have your cloth dyed? If the customer wanted red, then the man would dip the cloth in the tub and say, here is your cloth of dyed red. If another customer wanted his cloth dyed yellow, the man would dip his cloth in the same tub and say, here is your cloth dyed yellow. If a customer wanted his cloth dyed blue, the man would dip it in the same tub and say, here is your cloth dyed blue. Thus he would dye the clothes of his customers different colors, dipping them all in the same solution. One of the customers watched from the back of the line with all of this in amazement. The man asked him, well, what color do you want your cloth? The customer said, brother, dye my cloth the color of the dye in your tub. And everybody laughs, it all catches him. We are all here today because that's what we've asked. We want to know what is the real story going on here. What is happening? This world is that tub of dye, and your mind is your freshly cleaned piece of cloth. And the things that you take in through your ears and take in through your eyes, the things that you feel, the things that you touch, and even the things that you, well, I'm not going to say think, because think is what's being colored. So these things that you're taking in through the senses, the things that you give permission to come into your person, are determining the color of your mind. And the color of your mind will determine your experience of God, your experience of this world. Because this moment is God. This moment itself. It is the thing that the scriptures talk about that has no beginning, that has no end. This moment has never been born. This moment never dies. This moment is God. In the Christian scriptures, when Moses is commanded to go to the Pharaoh and demand that he free his 3 million slaves, Moses is like, oh yeah, sure, yeah, okay. Who am I going to tell him sent me? By whose authority am I going to ask for 3 million people to be set free? And God says to him, tell him, I am has sent you. God is the present, Sat. It is the Sat of Swami Chidbrahmananda, this moment. This moment is the container of all things that happen. And incidentally, this moment is you. Now, your experience of the moment, most of us have almost never had. Those people who have heard me before are going to say, oh, he's going to talk about that. Yes, I'm going to talk about that. Because it's one of the most important things for me in putting life together. Sri Nisargadatta, in that book right there, I Am That, says that only this moment exists. There is no such thing as past and no such thing as future. that they are concepts of the mind alone. So I read that and I thought about, well, wow, okay, that's crazy. But he brings it up, he reasons it out. He says, even your memories don't exist until they're brought into the moment. And even in the moment, they are only part of the present. They are not part of the past, even as the memories. So I thought about that. What is it that we bring into our mind in the moment? The moment should flow, as it were. Let's go ahead and talk with past, present, and future, because we really can't think any other way. So the moment is that portion that you're conscious of, this moment. And it should just flow by freely. There should be no attachments to it, no aversions to it. The saint sees it as perfect. Sees no change necessary. The deluded always think the moment has to be changed. I need more money, I need more house, I need more car, I need more food, I want less weight. On and on like that. And what happens is things flow by and we grab them. Ooh, I like that one. And we store it in mind. And as soon as you begin storing things, what happens? You get a sense of past. So your past is your attachments. They are the things that you wouldn't let flow through the present, that you grabbed and put them in your mind. You may think, no problem, except what do? They sit there waiting to become a lens for you. And my big and favorite example is pizza. I remember walking on Polk Street in San Francisco sometime in 2001. Beautiful day. I was in San Francisco, I was in the monastery, just joined, less than a year before. And I was feeling wonderful, how beautiful life was, how excited I was about all the things that were coming. And I'm walking along perfectly content and enjoying all of it, and I smell pizza. And I'm like, wow, that would be nice. But I'm a monk. I don't have any money to get a piece of pizza. So I'm like, oh my God, I don't have any, I really would like to. And then I think, wait. Swami Prabhupada gave me $20 for my Christmas card. That's still on my desk. I can walk back to the monastery and come get that $20 and come back here and get my piece of pizza. And I realized in that little event right there was the whole circle of life. That the I, always perfectly content, the I, always full, needing nothing, enjoying the presence of God, the divinity of the moment, suddenly smells something in the present, which if I had been a mature sadhu, I would have just enjoyed the smell of pizza. That smells wonderful, and just kept going. But I wasn't. What happened is that smell of pizza made me reach into my bag of attachments and pull out that red lens of pizza. And I looked through that lens at the present moment and I saw no pizza. Oh my gosh, there's no pizza in my moment. I have to come up with a plan for getting pizza in my moment. And at that moment, future is born. My concept of future is my desires. My concept of past is my attachments. And most of us spend all of our time bouncing back and forth between those things. Our attachments remind us of something that's not present in the moment. The moment needs to be fixed. We come up with a plan which requires a future to bring that object into the present for our enjoyment. And so we spend all the rest of our life going back and forth, bing, 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 bing. We get that new computer, we're totally jazzed about it, totally happy about it, and then that Best Buy ad comes and there's one that's twice as fast and half as thick and 10 pounds lighter. And suddenly, this piece of junk on your desk, which was the height of technology when you bought it, is worthless and embarrassing, you know? So now you have to go do it again. Well, you have to come up with another $4,000 for it. You know, and this is the trap. This is the trap of living. And that's why it is very important to pay attention to what dye we're dipping this mind into. What are we identifying with and who do we think we are? You know, to come up with that very clear idea of the fact that God is everywhere present and always perfect, and to enjoy that perfection, be full of that perfection, and don't let your attachments create desires that force you to be discontent, to force you to be unhappy, and then become a slave of the senses, a slave of something that's never going to be happy, a slave of something that's never going to be content, but will always keep you distracted from the perfection within which you live. which is your birthright. God can be seen, Ramakrishna says. He can be seen through the pure mind and the pure intelligence. Through attachment to woman and gold, the mind becomes impure. The mind is everything. It is like a white cloth just returned from the laundry. It will take any color you dye it with. Knowledge is of the mind, and ignorance is also of the mind. When you say that a certain person has become impure, you mean that the impurity has colored his mind. So he says woman in gold. He's talking to a group of young men, so that's why he used that term. He's talking about lust and greed. But lust and greed can even be removed or reduced in the terms of mathematics. To what? To taking. The idea of taking, which is the fundamental flaw in realizing God, or in the reason we can't realize God, is because of this notion of taking, this notion of me and mine. If you take an experiment and sit quietly for a moment and begin to watch the mind, just watch it pass by. Vivekananda gives instructions for these in Raja Yoga, amongst other places. Watch things go through the mind. Don't judge them, don't question them, don't analyze them, don't do anything. Most of all, don't own them. Understand that the mind is an organ secreting thought, and let it secrete thought, and know and learn that every thought is directly related to the previous thought, that it is the turning wheel of samsara. It is not you generating the thought. It is not you creating the thought. You are merely watching it. And do that as a practice. And what will happen is you will see that that irresistible need to identify, to grab one. You'll be sitting there, and if you are successful for a moment and you're watching them all go by, the thought is equally going to go by that says, I'm having a great meditation. And you're going to be like, yes, I am. Oh. You're going to own that thought because it had I in it, and having in it, and great meditation. And as soon as you grab that, you violated the boundary. You've reached across, and you've stuck. You've stuck. And now you're going to have to work it all over again. No, back off. Just watch. And you'll find another one come up. And you'll see in a very palpable way what attachment is, what it means to be attached, that it means to identify with something. It means to take your eye and say, this one is mine, this one came from me, this one identifies me. And you can learn and see that in your mind thousands of thoughts go by, thoughts of crazy things. You know, you'll get so angry, you'll think of murdering someone. But you don't attach to that. You don't identify yourself as a murderer, so that thought goes by and doesn't have any effect. You know? But then that thought comes by, I'm getting old. Oh, this one you grab onto. You can't let that one pass by like the murderer passed by. This one, no, oh God, I am getting old. Look at this. Oh God, I'm getting old. You know, oh, and fat. Oh, I'm getting fat and old. Oh my God. You know, and it goes on like that. You can't let those ones pass by, but you see how arbitrary it is. Those thoughts could have passed by as freely as the murderer passed by. They no more identified you or were true about you than any of the other thoughts, the crazy ones that go through. It's just a matter of which ones you grab out of the air and own and say, this is mine, this is who I am. He says, God can be seen, but only through the pure mind. Pure mind and Brahman are one and the same, he says, which is quite a statement. It goes along with that statement when someone asks Ramakrishna, who are you? Which is always an interesting question to ask an avatar, I think, if I ever meet one. Who are you? And he says, I am a whole through which God can be seen. He was an absence of ego. Looking at him, you saw the direct manifestation of love. This is what love does in every situation. You want to know how love acts in that situation? Ramakrishna, by the way he lived, could demonstrate to you what pure love does in that situation. So you can read about that. He is not being described as a personality in that book there. That book is not a biography of Sri Ramakrishna. That biography is a description of what you will be like when you give up the idea of me and mine. That book is a story of how you were meant to live without delusion, without ignorance, without bondage. It's a story of your character. a story of your potential, a story of who you are and what you are meant to be. So you read that and understand, this is my soul speaking to me, which is why that book touches us when we read it. It is my own soul teaching, echoing, just like strings on a guitar. You hit a pure string and all the other ones vibrate, and that's the sound of the guitar. You read that, a string is plucked and your soul vibrates. Yeah, that's truth. That's truth. I know that's truth. That's right. And that's why we worship the self in Thakur. That's why we fall. So your mind is that portal. You can experience God. He's here. He's all you've ever seen. He is the only reality. This room is Brahman. It's mind alone and the attachments that we've had and the projections that we make because of that create chairs and people and deities and roofs and speakers, and all of this fun, as it were. For no other reason than that, just for fun. So what can we dye our mind with? Ramakrishna is talking to Bankim. He says, well, what do you say about man's duties? Bankim smiling. Well, if you ask me about them, I should say they are eating, sleeping, and sex life. All right, the master sharply. I think this is the only place where the master answers somebody sharply. To get on pure love's nerves, you have to say something rather directly offensive. He says, what is this? You are very saucy. What you do day and night comes out through your mouth. A man belches what he eats. If he eats radish, he belches radish. If he eats green coconut, he belches green coconut. Day and night you live in the midst of lust and greed, so your mouth utters words about that alone. By constantly thinking of worldly things, a man becomes calculating and deceitful. On the other hand, he becomes guileless by thinking of God. A man who has seen God will never say what you have just said. What will a pundit's scholarship profit him if he does not think of God and has no discrimination, no renunciation? Of what use is erudition of the mind if it dwells on woman and gold? Crows and vultures soar very high indeed, but their gaze is fixed only on the charnel pit. The pundit has no doubt studied many books and scriptures. He may rattle off their texts, or he may even have written books of his own. But if he is attached to lust, if he thinks of money and honor as the essential things, will you call him a pundit? How can a man be a pundit if his mind does not dwell on God? Some may say about the devotees, day and night these people speak about God. They're crazy. They've lost their heads. How clever we are. We enjoy pleasure, money, honor, and the senses. The crow, too, thinks he is a clever bird. But the first thing he does when he wakes up in the early morning is to fill his stomach with nothing but others' filth. Haven't you noticed how he struts about? Very clever indeed. There was dead silence. So poor Bankim. I only say poor Bankim because, I would have given that answer at one point in my life too. What did I know? So these things, he teaches us how to view the world. What are the things you talk about? Well, what are the things that you fill your day with? What is the first thing you look at in the morning? Thakur wouldn't even enter a room if there was a newspaper in it. That's how he managed to keep a mind so pure that it had no effect, that God was able to manifest purely through it. And then there's people like me, it's the first thing I want to grab in the morning, first thing I want to pick up. If they could throw it through my bedroom window, I'd be happier than going out to the front room to get it, Open it up and see what's on the headlines, see what's going on. We fill ourselves with that stuff, and what do we do then? You can see what goes on. Look what's happened to the world. We changed presidents, and look at how society changed. Why? Because one man changed. What is that? How much did our daily life really change? But because we're all watching the same box, and being fed the same things, and being angered about the same things, and being told the same things, we take that in, and that colors us all at once. Suddenly the whole country is different than it was 2 days ago. Because we're not being careful about what we color our mind with. We're not being careful. We're letting other people's agendas and other people's interpretations of reality and what is going on be the color that we're fed. If we paid attention to our own community, if we paid attention to the place that we live, we'd see that the world didn't change at all. Who cares what happened out there, in DC? Of course, that's just down the street from us, but in your own community, the same people are in need today that were in need yesterday. The same people are hurting today that were hurting yesterday. Be here, be present, be in your community. Find out from each other what you need and what is necessary. And your life will never be different. Color your life with love of the people around you. Empower the people that know you by being a high-minded character, by being concerned about them, by loving them. This is a message that we need again and again and again, so that we don't get all of this anger generated in us by things that we can't change, things that are beyond our power to affect. We get so upset about what's going on 3,000 miles away in this country or that country. We get so upset over the issues, the political issues, or how this, violence is going to end. And the whole time we're distracted. We're just driving through our own community, not noticing or helping with anything, but being terribly concerned about things that we can do nothing about. And that causes an angry society. That causes an angry society that reaches out and strikes against an anonymous enemy, in many different forms. We're watching it happen. If we anger ourselves with battles that we have no power to affect, that are produced by anonymous people that we have no power to touch, then our anger is going to be directed toward the same anonymous people that we don't know, that we blame, that we categorize. So the antidote: pay attention to what's going in your mind. Pay attention to the colors you're giving your mind, because it's changing how you build your community and how you touch your neighbors or don't touch your neighbors. Live locally. The Chandogya Upanishad says, a young boy said to his mother, I'm going to go study the Vedas. Tell me the name of my father and my caste. The mother was not a married woman, and in India the child of a woman who had not been married is considered an outcast. He is not recognized by society and is not entitled to study the Vedas. So the poor mother said, my child, I do not know your family name. I was in service and served in different places. I do not know who your father is, but my name is Jabala, and your name is Satyakama. The little child went to a sage and asked to be taken as a student. The sage asked him, what is the name of your father and what is your caste? The boy repeated to him what he had heard from his mother. The sage at once said, none but a Brahmin could speak such a damaging truth about himself. You are a Brahmin, and I will teach you. You have not swerved from truth. So he kept the boy with him, and he educated him. This is the condition that we come before God with. If we come thinking that it's our name and our background, if it's the way we live or who we are that gives us access to the beloved, if we think that it's our behavior and our purity of mind and it's our good living that has given us all the good things that we think that we have, we're not going to get teaching from the Brahmin sage. We have to go with honesty. We have to go guileless, as we are, and know that you will be received because of your truthfulness, that you'll be received because of your earnestness, you'll be received because of your sincerity. Those are the most important qualities for the seeker of God. Your truth, your sincerity, and your earnestness. Ramakrishna says if you have those three qualities, God will take care of the rest. You'll be brought home by Him alone. So when we approach God with our mind, we see the mind as the mind. We admit its condition, all the desires it has, all the wrong thinking it has, all the notions of ego and self that it entertains. And we don't make excuse for it. We don't say, oh, that's okay, I'll go anyway. It's not like that. We go and we say, help. Ma, look at this mind. Look what I have to look through all day long, every day. Is it a wonder I am what I am? Look through it for a moment. Help me see. And Mother says, oh, just keep looking. I'll sit here next to you, and don't forget that I'm sitting next to you. Don't forget that I'm looking through your mind with you. Don't forget how intimately I know you. And still I tell you that you're mine, that my love for you has no limit and no bound. Vivekananda, I shared this morning in a lecture, Vivekananda says something very beautiful. He said, you do not grow, you do not evolve. He says, your mind evolves because of its contact with you. You are that ever-present self, that ever-blissful awareness, that Sat-Chit Ananda. And your mind, by its constant contact with that ideal, is growing better and better and cleaner every day. And by identifying that, by having Mother sit with you, having Thakur sit with you, having Jesus sit with you, whoever your beloved is, have them sit with you consciously and to look through your mind with you, that mind will evolve even faster, will clear out even faster. And soon people will begin to describe you as a whole through which God can be seen. That's quite a jump, but we should dream big nonetheless. Vivekananda says, what he struggles against is the bondage of physical nature, the lack of physical gratification. But out of this lower consciousness grows and broadens the higher conception of a mental or moral bondage and a longing for spiritual freedom. Here we see the divine dimly shining through a veil of ignorance. The veil is very dense at first, and the light may be almost obscured, but it is there, ever pure, ever undimmed. The radiant fire of freedom, that radiant fire of perfection. But this is always burning within. And our notion of what it is to be free develops as we grow, as we change. You know, as we were children, we thought freedom meant being able to eat all the cookies we wanted to eat at any given time. That was freedom. But I had a minister in high school teach me something very important. At that time I was thinking of, well, pardon me, I was thinking about sex life in high school, of course. And at that time, that was my conception of freedom, being able to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. I didn't want anybody telling me anything to do. That was what I thought freedom was. And he told me something very important that stunned me at the time and changed my perspective. He said, you're not free to say yes to something until you're free to say no to it. When you're in charge of yourself enough to say no, then you're in charge of yourself enough to say yes. Don't be deluded by thinking that serving your body and mind is freedom. It's bondage. You think it's freedom when you think your body and mind is what you are. That to me is the cruelest aspect of Maya. That by identifying with this body and mind, we're led to think that we're free. We're led to think that happiness is possible in that condition. And we define the whole world turns 180 degrees. That which is good is actually bad, and that which is bad is actually good. You know, there's a great scenario in the Old Testament of the Bible where one of the prophets is given 2 scrolls, and one of the scrolls, he eats the scroll and it's very sweet in his mouth, but then very bitter in his stomach. And then God gives him another scroll, and he eats that scroll, and it's just the opposite. It's bitter in his mouth. Oh, so sweet in his stomach. And God tells him, you know, that which is pleasant is good in the mouth, sweet in the mouth. Pleasant is good in the moment, but its fruit is sour in the morning. That which is good is bitter in the mouth, perhaps bitter in the moment, but the fruit for tomorrow is sweet indeed. So as we're coloring our mind, as we're making our decisions, make your choice between the good and the pleasant. The pleasant may be nice right now, you know. It may seem like, yes, I'm going to have another drink. Yes, I'm going to get bombed like I did last Friday night, because that's how I have fun. That's my sweetness of the moment. But tomorrow morning, remember the words you spoke last Saturday morning. Oh my God, I'm never doing this again. Remember, the sweetness of the moment may be the bitterness of the morning, whereas the good in the moment will be your sweetness in the morning. You know? So take hold of those things when making your judgments. Live for a better tomorrow for yourself and the present will always be better when it comes. I laugh just at that notion of the present coming. Of course, it's always here, but there it is. So these 3 steps to freedom, what are they? These are some notes from a lecture delivered in London in 1895. Know that the soul is sitting in the chariot. The body is the chariot. The outer senses are the horses, the mind the reins, and the intellect the charioteer. So man crosses the ocean of Maya. He goes beyond. He reaches God. When a man is under the control of his senses, he is of the world. When he has controlled the senses, he has renounced. So this separation is so very important. It was last weekend, I think. I was in Michigan, sitting on a panel on mental health. And my topic was ancient wisdoms for modern therapies. And we were talking about dealing with depression and strategies for living with being depressed. And one of the first teachings that helped dealing with that is this idea of separation from mind. To know that you are not mind, you are not body. You can only say 3 true things about yourself. You can say, I exist. That's an easy one. Although that really implies I'm present, and that's a little bit more difficult. You can say that I'm intelligent, and you can say that I am love or bliss. Those are the 3 things you can say legally about yourself and be telling the truth. When you say I'm tired, when you say I'm jealous, when you say I'm angry, when you say I'm hungry, those are false. Those are not descriptors of you, those are descriptors of body and descriptors of mind. So it is not you who is depressed. You can say my mind is depressed. My mind is unhappy. My body is hungry. My body is sick. My mind is jealous. But you should always follow that up with reminding yourself, I am free. I am love itself. I am intelligence itself. I am present. And you can indulge in any one of those 3 identities, and it will take you toward your highest ideal. So it gives you a place of refuge. And when God says, take refuge in me alone, that's what he means. Take refuge in that self. Take refuge in the fact that you are not depressed, you are blissful. Take refuge in the fact that you are not stupid, I am intelligence itself. Take refuge in the fact that this present moment is divine and open to it. Put all of the concerns of the future and all of the regrets of the past, they're made up. They're just colored glass. They mean nothing. This moment is yours. Everything in the mind came through this moment. Out of this moment came skyscrapers, airplanes, computers, saints. This moment that never began and never ended is the same moment that Jesus walked in, the same moment that Ramakrishna sat in, the same moment that Buddha taught in. And now you're inhabiting that moment. And from this same moment they pulled their scriptures. From this same moment the Vedas were pulled out and crystallized into written form. In this moment the Vedas are still there for you to pull out, for you to glean from your experience of this moment, to learn the wisdom that they wrote down for you and make it your own. You know, the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, they were all given enlightenment by Ramakrishna. And after Ramakrishna passed away, they were all spending hours and hours in meditation, and M came to them and said, what in the world are you guys doing? Why are you meditating so much? You've already had your realization. And their response was, we want to make it our own. Yes, it was given to us, but we want it to be a part of us. We want to make it our own. And so that's your opportunity now with this moment, you know, this that's been given to you. Yes, read the books, sure, they're wonderful, they're beautiful, but they have to come from here. You have to pull them out of this moment. That's what your practice is. That's what your prayers are. That's what your effort is. You becoming one with the Vedas that were pulled from the same moment that you're inhabiting at this moment, at this time. To hear them everywhere around you. Like was it Rama and Sita when they were approaching the Guru's house in the woods, and Rama stills Sita, he says, stop, listen. Can you hear the birds are singing the Vedas? And they stopped and listened and heard the birds sing the Vedas. Ramakrishna also had a similar experience. He was sitting on the banks of the Ganga, and he was telling his disciples later, he said, I was sitting there and I could hear the waves lapping on the shore, repeating the ancient mantras. You know, this wasn't being poetic. That is where the seers get their information. That's how the scriptures appeared to us. We had people that were present enough, people that had erased that sense of me and mine from their mentality, people who had become fully immersed in the being of God and could hear the eternal Vedas from the waves and the shores of the Ganga, could hear the birds singing the truths of God and write them down, could feel in their bones the lessons of the Vedanta, and could rise in their soul to that inner spirit of love and purity and freedom, absolute, beyond the bounds of a body and a small mind, ever pure, ever free, ever blissful. That is the notion of where Thakur is trying to take us. When the food is pure, then the inner sense gets purified. On the purification of the inner sense, memory of the soul's perfection becomes steady. What you do day and night, Ramakrishna says, comes out through your mouth. A man belches what he eats. He becomes guileless by thinking of God. So this is the notion. Think of God. Think of your highest ideal. And then the memory of what you are will become clearer to you. Because see, we all have an inkling of what we are. How do we know this? I'll give you two ways that you know this, if I can remember them. In this world, there is nothing eternal. Is that right? There's nothing that lasts forever, right? So where did we learn that idea of forever? If we're a mind that simply takes in experience and synthesizes sensual input, where did we learn about forever? Nothing in this world is infinite. Nothing. Everything has boundaries. How is it that you know of infinity? How is it that you long for it? Eternity and infinity are things that we brought to this world. A memory we had of ourself before it was embodied, before it was described with limitations and restrictions, before a small personality became what we thought we were. You bring these notions with you. The problem with this is that all of us are desperately trying to express everything that we remember. Infinite love, infinite security, infinite power, infinite love. And we've been given just 5 short little paintbrushes called senses. And we're asked to paint the infinite on a finite canvas. How desperately we're trying. How heroically of an effort we are putting forward. Doing the very best we can. And yet going to bed alone at night and somehow finding ourselves weeping. Finding ourselves somehow discontent. Even when everything is perfect, we lay down alone and wonder, where is the lover? Where is my beloved? One of the devotees says to Thakur, can't we realize God without complete renunciation? The master with a laugh. What do you think he said? I love his answer here. The master with a laugh. Of course you can. Why should you renounce everything? You're all right as you are. Follow the middle path. Like molasses, partly solid and partly liquid. Do you know the game of knacks? Having scored a maximum number of points, I'm out of the game. I can't enjoy it anymore. But you are very clever. Some of you have scored 10 points, and some 6, and some 5. You've scored just the right number. So you are not out of the game like me. The game can go on. Why, that's fine. Everybody laughs. I tell you the truth. There is nothing wrong in your being in the world. But you must direct your mind toward God, otherwise you will not succeed. Do your duty with one hand, and with the other hold to God. After the duty is over, you will hold to God with both hands. It is all a question of the mind. Bondage and liberation are of the mind alone. The mind will take the color you dye it with. It's like white cloth, just returned from the laundry. If you dip it in red, it will be red. If you dip it in blue or green, it will be blue or green. They will take only the color you dip them in, whatever it may be. Haven't you noticed that? If you read a little English, you at once begin to utter English words. Foot, 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 wit. The master was merely mimicking sounds of English. Then you put on boots and whistle a tune and so on. It all goes together. Or if a scholar studies Sanskrit, he will at once rattle off Sanskrit verses. If you are in bad company, then you will talk and think like your companions. On the other hand, when you are in company of devotees, you will think and talk of God. The mind is everything. The mind has his wife on one side and his daughter on the other. He shows his affection to both of them in different ways. But his mind is on one and the same. Bondages of the mind and freedom also of your mind. A man is free if he constantly thinks, I am a free soul, how can I be bound? Whether I live in the world or in the forest, I am a child of God, the King of Kings. Who can bind me? In the same way, by repeating with grit and determination, I am not bound, I am free, one really becomes so. One really becomes free. So it's that constant reminder of yourself, that constant reminding, I am Swami Chidbrahmananda. This body is a temporary condition. This mind is a set of limitations and restrictions that I call a personality. But it is only a very small part of me. I am infinite. I have never been born. I have never died. This moment that I mistakenly think I inhabit, I am actually its container. This moment is contained in me. I am that. The infinite self, ever pure, ever content, ever free. Remind yourself of that over and over. Renounce the things that change. Cling to that witness that never changes within you, that has always been watching. Grab on and know. Know that all is well. Where you are is where you should be. God is everywhere present and always perfect. But know that this is not you. And the up and down that you feel is only because the perspective is only available to one side of the coin at the moment. Eventually in your nature, you will see both sides of the coin simultaneously. And there the bliss of God resides. The freedom from the duopoly, as it were. The constant bouncing from one side to the next. Those two sides of attachment and desire. Attachment and desire. Eventually you come to sit in the moment. The birds and the tree merge into one, and you know that you have always been content. You have always been at home. And now you can smell pizza without a need for pizza. Right. Do you want some more?
Sure.
Keep going, or do you want some questions?
Yeah, sure, I think we can, or we can have some questions.
This third part is about training your mind, how to get there. Reason out what is true from what is untrue. See that God alone is true. If for a moment you think you are not God, great terror will seize you. As soon as you think I am He, great peace and joy will come to you. Control the senses. If a man curses me, I should still see in him God, and through my weakness I see him as a curser. The poor man to whom you do good is extending a privilege to you. He allows you through his mercy to worship him thus. Yes?
Do you mind moving the microphone a little closer?
Oh yes, this is my internal problem. It follows me everywhere with microphones.
Thank you.
Yes. So this idea of discrimination, Thakur, Ramakrishna, he emphasizes it almost more than anything else in his writings, this constant notion of discriminating between the real and the unreal. Do you know what the definition of the real is and what the unreal is? Anybody? Want to shout? Anybody want to embarrass themselves and shout out the wrong answer or right answer?
Permanence, that which never changes.
Yes, that's it. That which is unchanging alone is real. Anything that changes is unreal. All right. Who's going to tell me what the real thing is? What doesn't change? The self. Yes. that steals the thunder. But it's very true. The first time I read this, the first time I read that scripture, that the self alone, that God alone is real and God is unchanging. That which is unchanging alone is real, and that which changes is unreal. You know, my first year in the monastery, I read that in the gospel, and I got super excited because that was very concrete, and I was like, I can do this. This one I can figure out. So I went up to the shrine. I spent about an hour and a half in the shrine, just going through, trying to think of that thing that doesn't change. It's like, okay, no, not that. No. And I was pretty diligent. I sat there for an hour and a half, trying to be quieter and quieter, trying to find the thing that didn't change. And finally I went down to the lunch table, and I was like, Maharaj, I said, you know, I read this morning in my reading that those things that don't change alone are real. And I spent all morning trying to figure that out. And I said, I don't see anything that doesn't change. And he looked at me and just smiled, and he said, who was it that was looking for the unchanging? Wow, another one of those moments in my life where I was like, that is so cool. Oh my God, that's crazy. That's crazy. And it was crazy, and it is crazy that this self, you know, there's all kinds of proof of it that you completely ignore in your life. The fact that your 2-year-old body had nothing in common with the beast it's become now, you know. Not one cell in there is the same, and yet your I is always the same. You still refer to yourself the same way you did back then. I remember looking through my preteen body, you know. I remember longing to be a man, you know, and thinking how exciting that was going to be and how wonderful that was going to be and everything, you know. All that craziness. And somehow that sense of I has remained. That innocent child, you know, that is playful and wants to hug its mother and wants to sit on its dad's lap and tell him about the day and show him his new toy. And that same self is the same one that still wants to take things to his friends and still wants to make cookies for his mother and still wants to go visit on a surprise for Thanksgiving, you know. That eternal self in there that is always playful and always young and always wanting to give and to giggle and to chuckle and to enjoy the company of the beloved. That self is the unchanging. That self is the eternal. And what a wonderful thing that's going to be at that point. When this body drops off, finally. When this body drops off, and you're like, whoa, I'm still here. It's crazy. I don't have a body anymore, but I'm still here. It was true, and you turn around and run into the light and everything's finished, maybe. But this notion, look what has to happen to us for the body to fall off, for us to be willing to get rid of it. Just think about it. Age to me is one of the greatest signs of grace. Pure grace of God. He would never be able to wrench me out of this body, you know, if my chest wasn't meeting my belly button. You know, if it didn't start hurting every time I got up from the dinner table. You know, if I didn't look in the mirror and find, you know, oh my gosh, you know, do that little tuck, it's like, oh, maybe just a little tuck. So maybe just a little hair color, just a little. I don't really need it, I just thought it'd be cool. You know, you start thinking like that. How, to what extent? I mean, God has to almost completely smudge the body into the ground before we come to the point where like, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. I give it up when there's nothing left to hold on to. You know, so this world is not made to trap you. This world is not made to be painful. It's not made to be full of suffering. It's made to set you free. It's made to teach you. There's nothing here. Go back inside. Find that everything here is yours, projected by you. It's not something you need, it is you. You know, when you're sitting there doing that practice of watching everything in the mind go by, do you know what you're doing? You're looking in the mirror. Everything that you see is you. Everything in this room is you. Everything. You're not a particular. You're all of it. The reason you don't recognize it is the reason you didn't recognize your own face the first time you looked in a mirror. You've never seen it. It is you, it's yours, in a sense, right? But you didn't know it, so the first time you saw it in a mirror, you had to learn that it was yours. There's a great example of this on YouTube. There's an example of everything on YouTube. But there's one, they put this giant mirror in the jungle in Africa, and they just left it there, and they put a hidden camera on it. And you watch all these wild animals come upon this mirror. It's fascinating. The dumber ones just get angry and, you know, totally confront it and like want it to go away, and then get frustrated and move on. But the apes come, and the apes, you see yourself in it. You know, they come. They also at first think that it's another tribe, that it's more apes, but then they come and you watch them learn. You watch, like there's an orangutan who lifts his arm and he sees it lift his arm, and you see him look at his arm, and then he looks at the thing, and he gets it. He's like, whoa, whoa. And then he starts looking at himself intently, like, wow, that's all me. And then the interesting thing he does is he goes around it and looks behind it, like, look over here. There's nothing there. But this mirror that you're looking in, that's why you have to learn about yourself. That's this whole notion of realizing self. You're seeing yourself everywhere in all of your myriad of reflections. And you have to learn that this is you. You have to understand that this is you. You have to grow into that notion. You know, and you think, how could that be possible? That's so far out there. And yet every night we experience it, don't we? In your dream, you're looking at a mountain range. It's 150 miles away. There's an army on a plane in front of you. What are you looking at? There's a man or a woman laying in bed asleep. That's all there is to that reality. A sleeper sitting there in bed or laying there in bed. That 150 miles between you and the mountains is in here. That army walking across the plain, every one of them is in here. It's all here. And yet in that dream, you're only one person. How is that possible? You're not just one person in that dream. You're the 150 miles. You're the mountain range. You're the army on the plain. You're all of those things. Where is all of that happening? We experience it every night, and the sages say, such is the day. It's the same thing here. And you're saying, but that doesn't make sense. My dreams have no continuity. That's how I know they're not real. You don't know that your dreams don't have continuity when you're in them. Don't you experience that all the time? You'll have a really great dream, and then you start telling your roommate about it across the table in the morning. Oh, it's a great dream. I was standing on this mountain peak, and like I started flying. I had these wings. And then I was in the kitchen, and my mom was there, and like she was coming out of the oven. And as you're telling the story, you're like, never mind. Somehow in the dream, none of that was crazy. Somehow in the dream, you have a body, you don't have a body. You're in this room, you're in that room. You're at work, you're at school. You're on the moon, you're in the water. You know, it's like, you know what Sri Nisargadatta says in that very book right there? He says that if you do take this world and break it into slices, this moment, pretend that past, present, and future actually exist, and put them all in a stack, he said every slice of the present has absolutely nothing to do with the previous slice. That there is actually nothing that's the same between the two of them. Every single thing in those two slices is different. Every single thing. It is your mind alone that creates a narrative to form a continuity out of those slices. And that narrative is your Maya. That narrative is Maya. To understand that from this moment to this moment, every single atom in the universe is different. Not one thing is in the same space. And yet to see sameness and to tell a story of continuity is what we're doing constantly to remain in charge, to maintain a sense of I, that we exist separate and apart from the beloved. And until we resolve that one error, none of this will resolve. None of this will have meaning. None of this will be profound. It will remain material. It will remain frightening. It will remain small. Be free. Know that God is the center, that you are the dreamer right now. I am you, you are me. We're all in one consciousness, in one dream together. Who am I to be afraid of? Who are you to be afraid of? We're here for love, to give. That the dreamer has a peaceful night's sleep, as it were. So let's open it up for any questions or comments, anything that you'd like to talk about or wonder about or share about. Or not.
No, I'm sure people will have questions.
You referred to mother before?
Yes.
Who is that?
Ah, well, who is that? She's represented in several places here. Mother, to me, is God, I guess, in a conventional sense. It changes from time to time, but even when it changes, I still say mother. Yeah. I think for me, the reason that it was mother is I've just always felt like people like me are not spiritual. People like me don't become monks. And only mother could make someone like me a monk. That only mother has enough grace to make me believe her. To give me enough courage to actually take a step in this direction. So that idea of mother is the only one that could convince me of forgiveness and grace to the extent that I needed to actually consider religion or consider spiritual life for myself. So I say mother all the time, and it switches. Sometimes it's Thakur, sometimes it's Jesus, sometimes it's Vivekananda, but I'm always being taken care of by mother.
You mentioned that the self is the only permanent thing in this. How do we remember that? Because we get caught up in our day-to-day, the memories of the past and the future, as you so wonderfully explained. But how do we keep reminding ourselves that we are different from, this is what's going on?
Yeah. There's not a particular way of doing that. There's as many ways as you can come up with. If I told you tomorrow you have an appointment at 3 o'clock, what would you do to remember it? You know, if I gave you a list of 8 things that you have to bring home from work tomorrow, how are you going to remember it? Write it down. If you have a class you're gonna be tested and you have to learn these things, how do you remember them? You read them again and again and study them. And it's really whatever works for you. You know, the first thing I think that's most important to me to remember is that this is a game. You've already won. Ramakrishna promises that everybody's going home. Some are going to go home after breakfast, some are going to have to wait until after lunch, and a few unfortunate souls are going to have to wait till after dinner. And then I've always imagined I'll be doing the dishes, you know. It's like, so we're all coming home. So the game's already over. We've already won. We will have our union with the beloved, there's no doubt. So then what motivates us at this point? The joy of knowing the beloved. The joy of experiencing these truths, of exposing ourselves to the highest ideal. The bliss of becoming in the sense of being. The freedom, the taste for freedom. These are the things that motivates us at this point. So I would say get up, remind yourself that this is a game. That the day in front of you is for play. Treat it that way. You know, do your duties as worship, and whatever you need to do. There's different tricks. You know, all the rules that are in Indian society, and to me as a Westerner, it seems like there's 100 million of them, and I don't know how you guys can function. I just can't conceive of having so many rules to follow all the time. And I believe that every single one of those rules was initiated by a sage who thought, well, how are we going to make them remember God while they're cooking? Well, let's tell them they can't taste it. Because they'll always be wanting to taste it, but we can't taste it if you're going to offer it to God. Let's tell them they can't wear their shoes in the kitchen. You know, there might be hot coals on the floor, so they're going to start. That's going to make them very mindful. So no shoes in the kitchen. You know, and one after another, he comes up with these different games to help you keep your mind on the beloved, to help keep your mind on God. And what happens after 1,000 years? Everybody's following the rules as rules and forgetting why the rules were put there. You know, that they were put there to keep your mind on God. So come up with your own rules. You know, I'm rather blasphemous in that way. I told the women yesterday, I said, wear your shoes in the kitchen, because that will disturb you so much you'll be thinking of God the whole time. Oh God, oh God forgive me, oh God forgive me, I'm in the kitchen with my shoes on. You know, do things that will help you remember God. Some of the ones that I tried, there was a time when I was a contractor and I would walk from one client to the next because I lived in San Francisco. And I determined that I would do japa between each client as I was walking. And so I decided that every time my right foot hit the ground, I would start my mantra. So I would, a full cycle of steps, 2 steps, would be enough time for my whole mantra. And I found it's one of the greatest things I ever decided to do, because I found that after doing that for 2 weeks, that I would go out hiking on the weekends, and just after the first 5 steps, immediately I would suddenly hear my own mind starting the mantra, because it had associated my right foot and walking with the mantra. So that was one of the things that I did. Another thing that I tried was, at work it bothered me. Like, what bothered me is that I had an image of myself of thinking of God a lot. And I suspected that that wasn't true, because I was only thinking of God when I was thinking of God. And when you're not thinking of God, you're not aware that you're not thinking of God, right? So I decided I was going to try and test this, and one of the things I did is I decided that between 9 and 5, every hour on the hour, I was going to say a prayer. And that prayer could be 2 sentences long or anything. And so to make sure that I didn't take the easy route out and do it mindlessly, I decided that always I had to have at least one knee on the ground. So for a week, I did that, and that changed my life. I realized how different a day was when I remembered God every hour on the hour. How at the end of the day, I was just so much more awake and just so much more present and happier. I mean, it wasn't a magic bullet, but it was an amazing experience. It really was. So, you know, I can remember being in a conference room in a meeting, you know, sitting there, seeing the clock hit 3 o'clock, and I was like, oh God, how am I going to do this? You know, and slowly making my way to the edge of the seat, putting my knee down, slipping off the seat, you know, if my knee touched the ground, and then, you know, look around and then bowing my head for a moment and just saying 2 seconds of prayer, and then, you know, sliding back over. No harm done. I did the whole thing, but it made me think of God the whole time, you know, and in a fun way. You know, Thakur is laughing all the time in the gospel. He is laughing all the time. And I'm afraid to say that the most spiritual gatherings I go to, I don't hear much laughing. You know, when people talk about their spiritual life, their spiritual practices, I don't hear anybody talking about how fun it is. I don't hear people talking about how enjoyable it is. And I think that we've really lost the spirit. It's your practice. You know, take the central ideas of what the Guru is teaching and then play with it. You know, have arguments with God. You know, one of my favorite poems by Rabia, she says that my whole life I've called on God and never got an answer, and then it occurred to me perhaps I'm calling him by his wrong name. So I made up my own name for the beloved, and I can tell you it has made all the difference. You know, come up with a nickname for God, chum-chums, you know, schnookers, and address him that way, you know, address him that way. If you do things with a pure mind and a desire to know him, there's another YouTube video, a great one. The Pope is speaking. He's on a big stage, and of course there's that giant, beautiful, not terribly different from this chair here, but this very ostentatious big Pope chair. And he's standing in front of it, talking at the microphone, and this little like 6-year-old, 5-year-old boy comes running on stage from the wings. He obviously got away from his mother, and runs onto stage and comes over and sees an empty chair, and goes over and goes through the whole business of climbing up into that chair and then sits in it. You know, this little guy puts his hands on the arms and sits there behind the Pope in the chair. And the Pope turns around, looks at him, and smiles. Nobody gets up to move the kid out of the chair. Nobody gets up to take him away. Why? Because he's free. He's pure. He's a child. Of course, if anybody but the Pope could sit in the chair, it would be a guileless child who could sit there. You know? And so know that. Work on your purity so that you can go and kick off your shoes and sit on the shrine with Thakur, cross your legs, you know, hand him a peanut or two and sit there and tell him, you know, it's been a tough one today, chum chum. It's been a difficult day, you know, I have to say. Yeah, I really feel like you really messed me up today. No, you could have helped me in that situation. You didn't. to have that kind of relationship with the beloved, because that is true and real. And the more that you understand that, the more real it becomes. And what is just barely an echo in your mind now becomes a presence. And then that presence becomes a knowing. And that knowing becomes an experience of the moment that is beautiful beyond the words you can muster to describe it. So it starts simply like that. Do whatever you can think of. There was a woman who came to me, she was having problems with her daughter. She was telling me, I do everything for my daughter. I take her to swim classes, I take her to ballet classes, I take her to softball practice, I go to her games on the weekend, I bake cupcakes for her Girl Scouts, And she says, she's nothing but nasty to me. She's mean to me. She's disrespectful to me. And I'm starting to resent my own daughter, and it's really becoming a problem for me. How can I deal with this? And being a monk, I'm fully acquainted with how to deal with your daughter. And I started thinking, I don't know what to do. And then I thought, well, the way that we deal with all of our problems, I said, the problem is you have to know that you're not doing anything for your daughter. Your daughter's incidental here. I said, what you should do is every time you do something for your daughter, I took you to baseball practice or softball practice today, write it on a small slip of paper. And on your shrine at home, put a brass bowl there. And throw that piece of paper in that brass bowl after you've dropped your daughter off. And then when you go and pick her up, write it up, I picked you up today. And put that in the brass bowl. And I said, then every night at the end of the day, after you've got all those slips of paper in there, put a little piece of camphor on top of them and set it on fire. And offer what you have done for Thakur to Thakur. That everything that you served him with today goes to him. And sit there and spend some time being happy that you had something to give to your beloved. That you had something to share with the divinity that will ultimately give you the very purpose of your life. So you have to play like that. You have to be conscious like that. You have to be creative and come up with interesting ways of getting this mind to be quiet, so that what you are, what you've always dreamed of being, can manifest, can come out and shine freely, unblocked by a small sense of me and mine. Like that.
There is a famous song of Ramakrishna, and where he describes that how he thinks that when I'm going around the city, I'm as if I'm going around my mother. Then when whatever I'm hearing all the sounds of God or Goddess or Mother's this thing. And then it's all the letters. So when I'm eating, I'm thinking I'm offering the food to Mother or my Mother Kali. Yeah. And so this is how he describes this beautifully. And then it says all the alphabets, all of them has some kind of connection to Mother. So I guess only people, sadhak and yogis can say
but see, that's the reality for all of us. I mean, that is true. That's not because he had an active imagination. Swami Vivekananda begs and begs and begs of Thakur to give him some enlightenment. And Thakur gives him that experience. And Vivekananda says, he spent a whole day walking around Calcutta having to bang his head against the fence to convince himself that this was real, because he could see that it wasn't. He was experiencing it all as unreal. And he had to keep bringing himself back into the body, banging his head on these railings and stuff. Because these practices, even though up front, they're imagination, up front, because we're so accustomed to seeing the world through the idea of being body-mind, that the echoes of our nature, which we sometimes attribute to conscience or something other than ourselves, to me that's the higher bird in the tree, that Upanishadic story of the content bird up above and the one bouncing around. To me that's the voice of conscience. And the problem is whenever the conscience makes a noise in your mind, you argue with it. Even though the conscience is who you are. You're siding with the fake self, the lower self, and arguing with the conscience. But the conscience is the one that's got your best interest in mind. It's the one that is really you. And when those two birds become one, it means when the voice of the conscience is your own voice, and you realize, excuse me, that was my voice. I didn't mean to argue with myself for 40 years. Oops. that unity happens there. Did you have a question?
Yes. two questions sort of related, and you touched upon those a little while earlier. One is, whenever we meet and discuss any matter of spirituality, we always say that, oh, this was great, but now let's go back to our homes and go on with day-to-day life until the next week when we meet again. We are again thinking about this. So the whole week has gone by. So intellectually I know that perhaps I should make it more frequent, like you said, about making a prayer every hour or something like that. Maybe, maybe not, I'm not there yet. And the other thing that we always do is, how do we know in which step of our spiritual journey we are at? That's a pretty common question for all of us in that group that we come up with. That was one question. I have one more.
Okay.
The second one, and I have never had the courage to ask this to a monk before. What is it in your spirituality that you feel different being a regular person to a monk? I mean, what really changes in between the two?
Wow. Okay, first question. The first thing I think that's very important is just what Thakur says. You're okay. Be what you are. Bring it into as much awareness as you can. You don't have to make big changes, but also know that if you don't make any changes, your growth will be much slower. You'll get there, but you'll be in the back of the line with me. You know, we'll be chat partners, waiting for the last dinner to be over. But if you want it to go faster, make small changes. When I first started getting interested in spiritual life, the first decision that I made, it was actually after I found this book. I decided that I would start a spiritual practice, but I didn't want a boxed religion. I didn't want anybody else's idea of what religion was. So I decided I would create my own shrine. So I got a tea box, one of those crates that tea is shipped in from Chinatown, and I put a little glass top on it. And I got me an abalone shell, and I liked the idea of burning sage, so I would burn sage in the abalone shell. And then I started getting into this idea of the Druids and earth religion, so I went and found myself an oak tree that had been struck by lightning, and took one of the branches and cut it into its little circular coins and wrote Druid runes on each one and learned how to read runes. And so I would cast runes in the morning, sitting in a big chair made out of driftwood. I was a California nut in every way, I'm telling you. You know, yeah, I had a big, in my apartment, I had this big room with just this driftwood chair and this little makeshift altar that had little whatnots on it. I mean, there was the abalone shell, the smudge stick that was in that, my little velvet bag that held my handmade runes. I had a deck of tarot cards that I had picked up from a gypsy in Prague, and she had taught me how to read those, so they were sitting there. I had a little purple hippo that I had found on a walk that I just thought was cool. It was on the shrine. And like a little stone that I had found at the beach. So like that, and it all changed all the time. You know, I'd add and take away to it. So I decided when I started, though, I knew that I was a type A person, and that I would immediately want to do 90 minutes of meditation twice a day, and that I would probably do it the first day, and the second day I would probably make myself sit for 100 minutes instead of 90. And then by the third day I'd be like, oh, I can't do that today, and then I would just kind of go into avoidance mode and miss a day. And then I wouldn't want to think about it the third day, and by the end of the week I had completely abandoned all sense of practice, you know, as a failed attempt. So knowing that, I decided, okay, 2 minutes twice a day. And I'm not kidding. I said 2 minutes, because I thought surely I can do 2 minutes twice a day. And then I made some more rules. I said you're not allowed to sit more than 2 minutes. At the end of that 2 minutes, you have to get up, because I knew my mind was always like, oh, we should add some time. And then that added time always makes me feel like the next day has to be at least that, otherwise I haven't been true, you know. And then I also decided that it had to stay that way for a month, that I couldn't increase my time by more than every month, and that time couldn't be more than 10% of the time that I was doing at that time. Okay? All right.
Mathematical.
Yeah, well, it was just because I had some self-awareness. I knew what kind of person I was, and I knew how much failure I had in my life, and I was pretty much familiar after a lot of therapy at that point why that failure was. Because I got way too ambitious. I tried to change too much, and I would demand too much. And I had a very fundamentalist view of the world, black and white, and so things were on or off. And so I had to counter a lot of that. And that 2 minutes a day, and I think I stayed at 2 minutes for almost a solid year. But that 2 months a day is what brought me into the monastery. So think in those terms. Habits change very gradually, and a very small change today can radically change the experience of life 10 years from now. You know? So just do small changes. But without those changes, you're pretty much resigning to life as it is. And if that's good enough for you, fine. Just increase your awareness of what it is to be you and what the day brings to you. And understand that by not changing, you're making it a decision to accept everything as it is. And so begin the practice of accepting it as it is, you know, and go forward. Now, the second part of it, what's different in my life now as from before. In reality, I'm the same guy, you know, without being too self-deprecating. I'm just the average dude. Really just stumbling forward, doing the best I can. The advantages I find in this life for me is that I could never have said no to the things I've said no to without the infrastructure of a monastery and a very stern and austere Swami watching me. You know, I simply would not have had the motivation or the self-control or the discipline or the willpower to tackle the things that I've had to tackle in the last 20 years. The second thing that I think was very important to me is that because I didn't have to go out into the world all day, every day, I found that the joy I got out of my meditations in the morning would last longer. You know, so like I could have a good meditation, and in the world, if I'd had that good meditation, by the time I got off the bus at work, it would be dissipated. You know, I would have already had all kinds of stuff. But in the monastery, I could have that great meditation, I could walk out of the shrine, nobody would speak or say anything, I could go down to the kitchen, make a breakfast in service to the Swami, serve him breakfast, you know, go about my chores in a quiet monastery that had pictures of some god or goddess everywhere I looked constantly, and just be constantly reminded by everything around me that I am a monk. I'm a monk, I'm a monk, I'm a monk. And monks don't do some things, and monks do other things. And the momentum of all of that constant reminder, I think, made things much smoother for me. Now I'm going to say something that I think is very important. In the world and eyes of Thakur, there is not a better path than other paths. That your path is the best path for you. And that a householder path is equally as important and equally as advantageous to realizing God if it's lived properly, as a monk's life is if it's lived properly. The contingent in both of those is if it's lived properly. So the householder path is very clearly laid out. It's a path of service. You're trying to create a sense of self that expands. First, it's just you. You learn how to love yourself, how to be kind to yourself, how to be respectful of yourself. Then you take on a partner, and now yourself is two. And you learn how to serve your partner and to take his needs into account and his life goals into account. And you learn to compromise and work that. And then you have a child, and now your world is three. And you have to learn how to take care of his needs and bring up his goals and train him in his ways. Then he gets older and he has his friends and a couple of brothers and sisters, and now you've got a bigger sense of I that includes all of this. And then he gets married, and then there's children. So you're expanding and expanding and expanding and expanding this sense of I to become infinite, you know, so that your service of everyone becomes you. And you keep the money that you make to take care of your family as you are expected to do. The extra, you become servants. You support, you know, guys like me who deeply appreciate the opportunities that I've gotten because of the generosity of devotees. The fact that I can live this life and take this kind of focus is dependent on you living your life, you know. So we need each other. We're helpful to each other. It's not that we need each other. We're helpful to each other, you know. And so in that sense, take the path that you're on. Be where you're at. and go forward. Take the next step forward. If you don't know what that is, sit quietly until you do. Mother can be heard, and she's speaking always. Yes, ma'am.
Sure. So I feel in my relationship with the beloved, with God, it's always like you're asking for something, or it's like always wanting things to go right. That's when you kind of start the dialogue. You know, when you said you have a little chat. So it's kind of like a bottle, kind of like you're always asking, and when you receive, you're thankful. Let's say there's an event that's going to come up, oh, hope everything goes okay, or someone's sick. You're always wanting, when things go right then, if someone gets better, you're a close person in your family, then you're thankful.
Yes.
But it's always kind of like an asking, and if your prayers are answered, you're thankful. And then if it doesn't, if your prayers are not answered, or when you hear of a terrible tragedy or something that happens which shakes your belief, the first thing that happens is doubt. Like, is there even a God? You know, why did this happen? So why is it because of, why this oscillation between, sometimes you have a deep belief, like, yeah, there is a God, and hey, everything got answered, and everything's been great. But at the slightest thing, it's shaken.
Sure. That's all right. You know, in our life, we've got maybe 100 years, and so we're allowed to be children for about 20 of those at most. All right, but God's life is 10,000 years, and we're allowed to be children for much longer in that relationship. And so we're children. Your children are always asking for things, always needing things. And if they say thankful, if they are thankful about something, boy, are you lucky. You know, because thankfulness doesn't even occur to them until they're 9 or 10 years old. And at that point, it's once a year for Mother's Day. You know, it's like, what, I gave you a card last year, why? What, do you don't think that's enough? You know, and it's not until they're 30, 40, 50 years old that they actually start recognizing what you've done for them. And that then they start really trying, if you're lucky, their heart really turns for you and really is like, wow, if I could have heard you when I was younger. You know. So and you're willing to give them all of those years. You're willing to be there all of those years for them in all of those conditions. And there are times where they're like, I hate you. You don't love me. You never do anything for me. You know, and we do that with the mother all the time. Are you even there? Have you ever done anything for me? What advantage have you been all my life? You're just hounding me about doing the right thing. You know, I'm sick of it. So like a spoiled teenager, you stomp out the door and purposely do something wrong to hurt her feelings. You know, whatever it is. It's all right. We're children. If it starts to bother us that we're children, then we grow up. Then we grow up, start treating ourselves more like an adult, start expecting ourselves to be more like an adult. And that will reflect in our practice. But we have to be children. You know, we have to admit, we're beginners for a very long time. If you read the Viveka Chudamani in the first couple of pages there, it tells you what the perfect student is. I remember the first time I read that, I went to Swami Chidbrahmananda, I was like, I'm going home. There's no point. If that's what it takes to be a student, I'm just going home. There's no point in even starting this. And he laughed. He said, yes, it is what it takes to be the perfect student. He says, because the perfect student, when the teacher bends over his ear and says in his ear, Tattvamasi, thou art that. Boom, he's enlightened, just like that. He says, but most of us, we've been told that 100 times already, you know, and it's made no difference at all, because we're not perfect students. So we're going to have to spend 98 years becoming perfect students. And once we're a perfect student, God will send a perfect teacher who will lean over our shoulder and say, Tattvamasi. And we'll, bing. Oh my God, how could I never have seen that before? This is incredible. I love it. You know, like, who was it? Was that Hriday? He gave some enlightenment to, and Hriday was running around. We need to tell everybody. We need to bring everybody. Get everybody over here. And Thakur was like, chill out, calm down, calm down. You know, it's like that. So again, know that we're all beginners, and know that the grace of God is plenty for us. That the love He has is endless. You know, I'll share another one of my favorites, is that story in the Bhagavatam when Krishna is dancing around the fire in the woods with all the gopi girls. And the writer says that all of the gopi girls felt that she was God's favorite. I love to meditate on that because it's true. Everybody is God's favorite. And because God is infinite, that can be true without having to take away anybody else's love. God has enough love to make us all feel like His favorite, because we are in fact His favorite. And it doesn't diminish for anybody else. I'm His favorite, you're His favorite. We're His favorites together. And to always know that, we're talking about an infinite lover here. We're talking about infinite grace and infinite mercy. And by our contact with such a beloved, we're going to become infinitely merciful and infinitely graceful ourselves as time goes on. That the people around us will become more and more blessed because they look through your eyes and see the beloved.